Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 13 of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're joined by Yasmine Mohammed, who's a hero of mine, and it's crazy to hear the things that she's had to go through. Unfortunately, the audio leaves much to be desired. I tried to do my best to correct for the errors, but unfortunately there was only so much I could do. So I'm sorry about that, won't happen again. Regardless, I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Soil abandoned fertile ones, feeding family.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 13 of Thinking Out Loud. As always, I'm your host, Vincent Freeman, and I'm joined by my good friend Bruce. Bruce, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you once again for having us.
And I'm joined by a very special guest here today, one of my heroes, an absolute hero of mine, Yasmine Mohammed. Yasmine, thank you for coming on the podcast. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me, Vincent. And I really appreciate your guys' flexibility with putting up with my issues and the pandemic and so many things tried to get in our way, but they were unsuccessful and we have succeeded.
Yeah, of course, not to worry about. I hope you had an absolutely fantastic Easter. I know I didn't. But it's funny, me and Bruce first met you at the Islam and the Future of Tolerance premiere up in Garden Grove in Los Angeles. You recognized Bruce back then. You didn't recognize me.
No, maybe because Bruce and I had spoken online beforehand, and so I was kind of prepared to meet him, but...
The password is pickle.
That's right! That's right!
I wish I understood that inside reference.
Yeah. It was just a silly thing. So yeah, had you understood the reference, then I would have recognized you. But yeah, I do remember LA, and Sam was there, and Eric Weinstein, and yeah, it was.
I can officially say that I've watched a movie alongside Eric Weinstein and Sam Harris, so that was pretty cool. We were in the same movie theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's great to finally have you on. You're one of the main people on my list of people I want to have a conversation with. So, as I said, it's an absolute honor to have you on, and I think we can have a fantastic discussion over here about many topics. So,
and I can't, Yasmine, I can't let you leave this podcast by saying what an honor and what a truly a pleasure it is to see and speak to you. And so it's, I'm very, very thankful to host it.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciate that.
You know, you recently published your book, Unveiled, and there's an interesting story there because you had to self-publish it. Is the public perception of ex-Muslims, or anyone who criticizes Islam, for that matter, that poor that people have to find other means of publishing their books? You know, how important it is to get a mainstream publisher, because this is an important story that you're trying to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the general consensus now for quite a few years has been that it's okay to criticize anything that's coming from a Western background, anything that's coming from a Western civilization, white people bad, all other civilizations, all other cultures, all other, religions, groups, identities, whatever. If they're non-white, then they are good. We cannot criticize them because then that makes us bad people. So that's just like the general rule. And so that's why people like me, who are basically minorities within minorities, so I come from a Muslim background and I want to speak about the atrocities within my community, that's still seen as me speaking out against quote unquote brown people. And so that's why that's viewed as something negative. And the general public, mainstream publishers don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. And you can see that same sort of phenomenon happening when you look at just recently on Netflix. There is a mini-series called Unorthodox, which is loosely based on a book by Deborah Feldman. So she leaves the Hasidic Jewish community in New York and she moves on with her life. The backlash that she has been receiving has been things like people saying to her, you are being anti-Semitic, you are bringing hate to the Jewish community because you are telling your story. Now, of course, if you watch the miniseries, if you read her book, there's nothing hateful about it, but she is speaking out against the fundamentalist ideology that oppresses the LGBT community, women, so many people within that minority. There are other minorities that are suffering in there, but people don't want to talk about that because as soon as she opens her mouth, it's like, oh my God, she's saying something against Jews, she must be anti-Semitic, even though she's Jewish herself. And the same thing is happening today with the whole pandemic, and nobody wants to speak up against the Chinese Communist Party because it's like, no, as soon as you say something bad about China, that means that you hate Chinese people, that means that you're being a racist bigot. Back to the whole, Ben Affleck in 2014 with his gross and racist, right? Like that same thing is just continuing on to today. So it is extra bad with ex-Muslims because of Trump, and he had the so-called Muslim ban. And so in order for people to fight against Trump, they felt that it was the way to do that was to support Muslims, to support Islam, which is why you see a hijab on every flat surface now, in advertisements, in media, everywhere, because they think that that's some sort of anti-Trump thing. But what they're actually doing is supporting Islamists and supporting this fundamentalist ideology. And the reason why it's so incredibly, it drives me insane is because they would never do the same thing if it were fundamentalist Christianity. They speak out against evangelical Christians like immediately, but they can't see the same thing when it comes to fundamentalist Muslims or fundamentalist Jews. So they just have such a double standard and such hypocrisy. And really that's what it is in a nutshell. So there was no way any mainstream publisher or mainstream literary agent was going to be able to get this thing published because of the current political climate right now, which I don't care about. I really don't care about Trump. I don't care about the political climate. This is my story. This is our story. I just got an email today from a woman in Iran saying, reading your book was like reading my book. And that's exactly why I wrote it, was because I felt so alone. And I don't want anyone to ever feel as alone as I felt. And so that's why I'm reaching out.
Yeah, that's a marvelous way to put it. And it's scary to see that these companies refuse to look at the Islamic doctrine microscopically. Because they view reality, the world, through the lens of diversity, through the lens of acceptance, they fail to just completely acknowledge the fact that these doctrines, these religious beliefs, are completely antithetical to what they're claiming to support. And I do think it is a genuine scare of bigotry that gets some people. And there are genuine imposters within the movement. So there are some people out there who are only speaking out against Islam because they want to catapult Christianity into the conversation. So how do we deal with these genuine bigots, these genuine imposters?
Well, you're right. There is going to be this constant, it's sort of like picking lice out of hair every now and then, you gotta like get rid of these things. But at the same time, the call is for us to stop talking, because when we do, we could inadvertently have these, basically parasites hanging on to us and then trying to get their agenda, pushed through. And it's like, those people are always going to exist, and all we can do is just fight it on both fronts. We can't stop talking because these guys might ride on our coattails, right? We have to still speak out for ourselves. And then every now and then we got to just shake them off as best we can.
Yeah, I agree. I remember I got into an argument on someone with Twitter about this because I must have been defending someone. Someone made a claim that I agreed with, and I retweeted that, and then the person was saying something along the lines that this person is only making that claim because he's a bigot under the veil. And I said, yeah, genuinely, we need to be concerned with these bigots, but the fact of the matter is that epistemologically speaking, we can never know for sure what someone's intentions are. So the best thing we can do is just go by the strength of their arguments. And it is a shame that there are bigots out there who are using ex-Muslims as a proxy to adhere to their malevolent deeds, but there's
You're right.
Yeah.
but it's impossible, right? Like I have over 100,000 followers. I'm not going to dig into every single one of their backgrounds to find out if they're, if their intentions are pure when they're supporting me.
Mhm.
If I see evidence of the fact, like if they say something like, oh, you're right, Islam is horrible, Jesus is king or something, Jesus Lord, then I'm going to be like, okay, well, actually, I disagree with you as well. You know what I mean? Like now they've let me know that I can disagree with them, but I've had that happen to me too, and it's super unfair. Like before you retweet somebody, you're supposed to go into their timeline and into their family history to figure out, who they are and why they're saying it. And then you're still going to be making a guess, right?
Yeah.
So,
Totally not
all I
pragmatic.
can do is like and retweet the tweets that I like. And if it happens to come from somebody with some nefarious intent, then when I am notified of that, then I can change my actions. But there's no way, it's just a thing that people do these days where they just love to do guilt by association. And it's incredibly unfair.
Yeah, and it's like they have to ignore the problem of people living in these first world countries, such as Canada, that are effectively living an Islamic theocracy in the confines of their own home. These are Western countries that people are living in and having to deal with poor conditions, and the omen of doom that these people fear are the words cultural relativism. And Bruce here has a few questions he'd love to ask you in this regard.
Yeah.
Yasmin, the subtitle of your book is something I really want everyone, all of our listeners, especially with everyone who identifies as being liberal or left, to really pay attention to and think about. And the subtitle is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. Now, in the broader context of things, we could swap out radical Islam with, as I think a mutual friend of ours would put it, Armin might say anti-enlightenment values. Western liberals are empowering that kind of narrative, and I can't think of a more striking example of this than that incident involving a court case in which a judge ruled in favor of returning you to an abusive family environment in the name of cultural relativism. You've probably done this a few hundred times, so I apologize for asking this right here. But could you briefly restate that event for our listeners who haven't read the book?
Yeah. It's surprising how much that still hurts after all these years. When somebody brings it up, it's still, I get that such a pang. So my mom essentially became the second wife to a man who was already married and already had 3 kids of his own. And he was an abusive man. He wasn't abusive toward her, but he was abusive toward us. My dad was abusive toward her. And so she felt like this was an upgrade, that he was just abusive to the kids, but not to her. So she didn't care that he was abusive toward us. And she met him when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And by the time I was 12 or 13, it was my very first time being in a public school, where I wasn't in an Islamic school, I was in a public school. So there was one of my teachers, my drama teacher, Mr. Fabro, who wrote the foreword for my book.
Yeah.
He asked me, are you okay? Because he could tell that there was something wrong. And I was feeling really depressed and really anxious because my mom had just told me, this will be your last year in a public school because I'm not going to let you continue you're going to have to go back to an Islamic school. So I was terrified of that. I didn't want to go back, and so I was in a dark place. And so he asked me, "Are you okay? Is everything okay? What's going on in your life?" And then we started talking. And then I told him about my mom's husband, and I told him about the physical abuse and the extent of the physical abuse. So this was not just, it started when I was 5 or 6 years old. He'd use a skipping rope to wrap my legs to the foot of my bed, to tie my ankles to the foot of my bed. And then he would hit the bottom of my feet with this stick, an orange plastic stick. And then that, it has to escalate, right? You do that when a kid is 5 or 6 years old. What do you do by the time you're a teenager? So by the time I was a teenager, it had escalated to hanging me upside down in the garage and hitting the bottom of my feet. And And the reason why the bottom of the feet is such a preferred spot is because that way no authorities can see it. No teachers can see the bruises or anything like that. But of course, with hanging a girl upside down, there's going to be bruises on her arms. There's a fight. It's not going to be so easy. And so my arms were covered in bruises and welts from when he was, when he'd miss and whatever. And so I showed those all to Mr. Fabro. And there were times, of course, when he wouldn't hang me upside down, but he would just take off his belt and hit me. And, there was so much abuse all the time. And so I told Mr. Fabro about it all. And because he's a teacher in a public school, it's his responsibility to alert the authorities. And so he did. So he told the police, and the police got social services, child services involved. And it became this huge investigation, and it went to family court. And my mom hated me now because I'm causing a problem between her and her husband. So it was a horrible time at home, but I kept on thinking that, Mr. Fabro had said to me, you have to be prepared, Yasmine. If you do this, if you speak out, then there is the possibility that you're going to be taken into foster care. Like, you'll have to go with a foster family. And I was like, please, let's, where do I sign? Like, let's do this. And so I kind of saw it as like a means to an end. Like, yes, my mom was like literally spitting in my face. She was so disgusted with me. She was so angry. But I felt like it's okay because I'm going to get out of this house soon. So I kept on telling the police the truth, and I would tell the investigators from child services the truth, and I told the judge the truth, and I stood firm, and I just like, I don't care, these people can't scare me, I'm going to say everything I need to say because I need to get out of this house. And in the end, after all that, the judge said, sorry, we're not going to remove you from your home because the way that your family is disciplining you is what is acceptable in their culture. That's the way Arabs discipline their children, and you happen to be from an Arab background, so that's just your lot in life. And as you can imagine, it got so much worse when I got home because, I tried to get this man arrested. So the hate was not only escalated from my mom, but from him as well. And what I heard from the judge, like this, you mentioned cultural relativism, the reason why I feel like it's so toxic is because of my personal experience with it, where that judge was essentially telling me, if you had been standing in front of me, a blonde girl with blue eyes, and your family was from Germany or Sweden, I would protect you. But you happen to have had the shit luck of being born to an Egyptian mother, so I'm not going to protect you.
Oh man, when I bought your book, I read it. I was reading it in a public coffee shop, and there were times I literally had to throw it down because I had to take a break because it was just so upsetting to me to read it. I know a lot of us felt the same way. And, but just days ago, I was listening to Bridget Fettis's podcasts, and we have an election coming up in the States in a few months, which is going to be a major shit show. One of her guests made the observation that currently we on the left, liberals, pseudo-liberals or whatever, we're not united at all, but we are loosely combined together with spit. That spit idea is that Western civilization is the root of all evil around the world. Now, I've had conversations with people around, like arguing for some kind of moral standard, some universal sense of human rights, and there are times I bring up Sam Harris's thought experiment as to the idea of if there's some kind of religion out there that had some kind of quote-unquote holy saying that every third child walks in darkness, And if there was a ritual in which you rake a knife across a baby's eyes at birth, blinding that kid for life, would it be moral? And the number of these pseudo-liberals who come back to me saying yes is mind-boggling. But what strikes me especially is that they almost always follow up with the idea that you should let people live the way they want to live. And that had me wondering if people, even on the left, who consider themselves liberals, really understand liberalism, because let people how they want to live, that's definitely a liberal value. But the principle that undergirds it just flies over people's head. Now, as a result of this, I mean, I used to be much further left. I moved further to the center. And I started doing this reading binge, researching liberalism. What exactly is it? And there were some ideas brought forth by liberal philosophers saying you had to take away certain rights from people, like the ability to cause direct harm, the ability to threaten someone with death or something that involves immediate these substantial consequences. Taking away these freedoms in order to ensure greater freedom, and what's left is the ability to pursue quote unquote life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the idea that you can let people live the way they want to live, the idea that only happens within a liberal, Western liberal framework. The framework of a liberal democracy just flies over everyone's head, and we've just seemed to have forgotten that. And we see people like Linda Sarsour claiming to speak for an entire minority, and people like Ilhan Omar using their status as a minority to bully minorities, homosexuals, gays, ex-Muslims, to bully minorities in their minorities. And we've taken this acceptance narrative to such an extreme that we on the left have corrupted the nobility behind diversity. Now, it brings forth the question: like, have we betrayed liberalism, or have we just simply forgotten about all the fundamental principles and ideas that allow it, and by extension, universal human rights, to flourish? Now, I understand you're a university professor, and there's a huge spate of college safe spaces of these microaggressions and all this other nonsense that is now pervading the minds of our young people. And can you speak to that? Have we betrayed liberalism? Have we forgotten what it is? And more importantly, can it be reawoken, especially since more and more people on the left are waking up to this?
So I think that liberalism is a paradox. You know, we have to talk about that. I'll talk about that in a second. But I think it's also being tested right now. So we didn't have to, liberalism, exactly what you said, it works, here when everybody is in agreement, right? But as soon as you start including people who believe in Sharia, for example, or if you're, when after Nazi Germany fell, they didn't just let, Nazis do what they want to do. Just think what you want to think. Just be who you want to be. Well, they could think what they want to think, but they couldn't just do what they want to do, right? So it didn't get, maybe there was a little bit of testing back then as well. I'd have to look into it more, but I definitely see some testing going on right now. And what I mean by that is liberalism is great, but it is not a free-for-all. There have to be stop signs. There have to be boundaries. Live how you want to live. Be who you want to be. Do what you want to do up until here. We need to have those lines in the sand. Now, those lines in the sand can just be like the rule of law, or they can be, your First Amendment, like whatever it is that you believe as a country that you've agreed, up until this point, you can do whatever you want to do. What's happening now is we don't have any stop signs. We don't have any lines in the sand. We're just allowing things to just be a free-for-all. And so that's why you have things like, the doctor who was performing FGM on so many children in Michigan, when the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation tried to get her to lose her license, get her arrested. She's performing she's mutilating these young children, they came up with the defense that it's religious freedom, right? And she's free today. So that's a problem. That's a problem. That's an example of one of those stop signs that we need. Yes, you are allowed to practice your religion as freely as you want up until here. And to be perfectly honest, those young girls that were mutilated by that doctor, in a much worse example, but in the same way, they're experiencing the same cultural relativism that I experienced. Because essentially that judge was saying, if you were a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl and your parents took a razor blade to your clitoris, I would protect you. But because you're a little girl from Somalia, then your genitals don't matter as much. You're just going to have to live with that physical and psychological torture for the rest of your life.
This is
So that's
This is racism. This is just racism under a benign mask.
Exactly. I don't think that they mean it as racism. You know, I think that they honestly do think that they're doing a good thing, but they just don't think it through. They don't think it through. And also, the groups that want these things are larger voting bloc than the groups who don't. So the ex-Muslims are a teeny minority. The reason, even though our values align with the greater liberal values, what we want is not as relevant as what the fundamentalist Muslims want, because they are a larger voting bloc. And at the end of the day, that's really what matters to politicians.
What surprised me was how you said liberalism has to have stop signs. That tells me that there has to be some kind of there has to be some kind of hard, solid, rock hard foundation you need to base that off of, which is why I brought up the idea of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Where, I mean, there's a term floated around commonly now, classical liberalism, in which, you know, my freedom to swing my fist ends exactly 2 inches. That has to be a principle, has to be universal.
That's the rub right there.
Exactly. And if people have forgotten that principle, then we, as a whole, end up betraying our values, allowing this kind of fundamentalist, anti-liberal idea to take root in our societies and rot it from within.
Well, it's not even that they've forgotten it. There are a lot of people that completely disagree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. When what so many people fail to recognize, you brought up a good point there, was that even if we're going by the general sort of slogan of let people how they want to live, right? Let people wear the hijab and we should celebrate it. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of these people don't have the freedom to not do so. And it's strange how this goes over people's heads, and it's bizarre seeing people like Russell Brand, for instance, when Sam Harris was on his podcast, seeing these people be megaphones for cultural relativism, almost as if this is the foundation of our moral ethics, and it's complete nonsense. As Bruce said, there needs to be some universal code of ethics that we can abide by, because the fact of the matter is there are quantifiable things that we can measure. We can measure pain, we can measure misery, and the fact of the matter is the baseline of every moral assumption in the world is that we want to minimize the amount of misery in society. Even an Islamic jihad who's going into the nearest embassy and blowing himself up, hoping to get the highest kill count, he's doing so under the impression that this is going to minimize the amount of misery that society is undergoing, that this is what Allah wants, this is the best society that will, the better society will come out of this. So there is a general foundation of morality that we all agree upon. And it's funny, Majid Nawaz coined the term regressive left. People like Ben Affleck, who you mentioned earlier on in the podcast. My first introduction, interestingly enough, to the conversation, my fascination, knowing nothing of the topic at hand, was that it wasn't about who was right during this whole Bill Maher, Sam Harris, Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
It was just plain and simple. Ben Affleck simply wasn't listening. And this seems to be a key component in the mix for what makes someone part of the regressive left. You're someone who is certainly a target by these people, right? You know, have you noticed the problem of Western liberals refusing to acknowledge the reality of many people living under poor Islamic conditions getting worse? Is it getting better? Do you think people are finally starting to listen more and more?
That's a good question. I think that from 2014, from when this happened, I definitely noticed it getting better, but that could have to do with the way social media is such a silo. I don't know if it's just my experience, so it's really hard to tell. I would have been able to answer that question better if this pandemic hadn't started and I would have had the opportunity to be on Bill Maher's show, because then I would have said what I have to say, and then I would have been able to gauge from his audience's responses, if the rest of the world is starting to feel, like if things are shifting, if the tides are turning. I don't know if I think I'm an optimist. Sometimes I like to think of myself as a realist, but sometimes I think that I'm actually an optimist, which really has helped me to survive. But I really do feel that people are feeling a bit more empowered to speak up. So in the past, the reason why Sam Harris and Bill Maher were being shut down had absolutely nothing to do with what they were saying. Like you said, Ben Affleck wasn't even listening. And all of the people that attacked them on Twitter and Facebook and articles and whatever, again, they weren't listening. All they had to say was, these men have white skin, they are men, and they are American. So the fact that they were white male Americans was the problem. So I think that the idea that is just as racist as saying, you are just a black woman, your opinion doesn't matter, is the same as saying you are just a white man, your opinion doesn't matter. People are starting to feel more empowered with fighting back against that. I think that, years ago when I was on Dave Rubin's show, that was the thing that I said at the time was like, one of the basic foundations of liberalism is when we're talking about Martin Luther King and when he talked about his dream of his children being judged by the content of their character, not by the color of their skin. And we're just going ahead and doing that, but in the opposite direction, and it's just as toxic. So I think that has changed a little bit, but I don't know if people are yet ready to hear from ex-Muslims. I don't know if they're yet ready to hear criticism of Islam yet. But I do think that people are starting to feel like they can fight back against people telling them to be quiet because of their immutable characteristics.
Yeah, Yasmine, I wanted to ask you about that because, here we are sitting around in quarantine because of the whole coronavirus scare. And, well, I'm Asian, and I've been asked by friends if I've suffered any kind of racial attacks because of the coronavirus. Thankfully, I haven't, and, I'm very, very glad to see the pushback against racism against Asian Americans. But even today, I was looking around social media, and what I'm seeing now is people trying to remove references to China, even simple phrasing, in criticizing the CCP, the Chinese government, and they're equating the idea of criticizing a government or cultural practices with criticizing the people. But when no one blinks an eye when we talk about the Spanish flu or MERS, Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, and it's almost implied that if you criticize China, you're criticizing Chinese people. But that's absolutely insane because the CCP is committing a genocide against the Uyghur Muslims in that country. It's terrible what's happening to them, and we have to hold the CCP accountable to that. The coronavirus. We need to critique the cultural practices that led to this, and to equate that with racism or bigotry is just absolutely insane. And I see so many parallels to the arguments between criticizing Islam and Muslims being such a diverse people, and being Asian, being Chinese. Now I'm starting to see these parallels to criticizing this authoritarian government murdering Uyghur Muslims. And
they're not just murdering Muslims, they're murdering their own people all the time. Like
Right.
over 1,000 people every year are being executed by the Chinese government. Like they are vicious to their own people. We need to be, the fact that we weren't talking about that before, kind of like what's going on in North Korea, we're like, whatever, it's none of our business, it's happening over there, But now that there's an opportunity to talk about it, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how Iran is treating its people. Let's talk about how Saudi Arabia is treating its people. Because we care about those human beings.
it's fucking insane because we're living in perhaps the least racist countries in the world. Not that we still don't have problems; they should be criticized, and rightly should be. But everyone is just turning a blind eye to what these atrocities in other countries, and it drives me absolutely insane to see that people still don't get it. I see well-meaning, good-hearted people trying to remove even a scintilla of criticism of China. I'm like, what are you guys doing?
They're supporting.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's going to be happier about that than China, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's exactly where I stand this whole time. When they try to remove Islam all the time from the issues, I'm like, no, but that's the issue that needs to be addressed. You're now through not talking about China and not talking about their involvement and not talking about their mistakes and not talking about their lies and not talking about the people that they have disappeared. You are providing cover for them and you are essentially supporting them.
Right. And what you said earlier about like how people are trying to cluster around minority narratives to bash Trump, they're clustering around the wrong representatives of these minorities rather than get behind someone like Raheel Raza or Majid Nawaz or even Azar Nomani. They clustered around Ilhan Omar and Mansour. And it's absolutely insane what liberals, leftists are just not getting. And the narrative about between ideas and people, you'd think that in the years since Ben Affleck had his self-righteous meltdown on Bill Maher's show, would have made that more apparent to people. But I'm in my own circles. I mean, I come from the Bay Area. They teach this intersectional bullshit in they're teaching it out of my old high school now. My God, and it just seems to be so inveterate, and I do see people waking up to it. But even among general mainstream liberals, I still see this self-flagellation, that this kind of arrogance, saying this is all our fault, all the problems around the world, and it's pure vanity. It's irresponsible, causing more problems around the world when we don't acknowledge our own values and we don't stand up for liberal values. People just are so quick to jump to, say, imperialism, colonialism, which was no doubt bad, but they're throwing the baby away with the bathwater, and it drives me absolutely insane. And now I'm not Muslim, I'm not religious, but being Asian and seeing this confusion gives me a little bit of the taste that you and the ex-liberal Muslim community have experienced, and I'm being driven batshit insane by all of this.
Absolutely agree with every single syllable that you just said. Yeah.
It's crazy to see so many of these people even fetishizing countries like Saudi Arabia because they have free healthcare or something like that.
Yeah.
It's the pinnacle of ignorance in this situation. You might as well be praising North Korea because it has social cohesion, almost as if it wasn't completely orchestrated.
God,
and
yes.
I want to know your thoughts on this. Barry Weiss recently wrote a book titled How to Fight Anti-Semitism. And she talks about how there are genuine anti-Semites within the Islamic community that have a substantial amount of power. She uses Representative Ilhan Omar and Linda Sarsour's examples, and evidence for these claims, such as Omar's previous statements about Jews and their fondness for money. Sarsour's praising of Louis Farrakhan, someone who has praised Hitler and said awful things about the Jewish religion. And I'm someone who has almost no good things to say about religion, but even then I would never stoop to what he has said. Do you think that these viewpoints that they have are a result of the way Islam teaches to view the Jewish religion?
Yes, unequivocally. I mean, Islam teaches that Jews are apes and pigs. Islam, like every second verse in the Quran, every second hadith is talking about cursing the Jews. There is a hadith about how there will be peace in the world once all of the Jews are killed, and all the Muslims will fight the Jews. And even the nature, even the rocks and the trees will speak out. If a Jew tries to hide behind a rock, the rock will say, "Oh, Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me." Because even the whole planet wants all of these Jews to be eradicated. When you are living in a Muslim majority country, especially in the Arab world, although I'm learning it's just as bad in the South Asian world, but my experience has been in the Arab world, it is absolutely, I mean, Jews are given such supernatural evil powers. The story that I give in my book is how when I was 7 years old and my aunt says to me, we were at the market, and she's like, "Oh, the cucumbers and the tomatoes are so small this year. The Jews are putting cancer in the vegetables, and so they're not growing quite as big." I was like, I was a child, and I was like, pretty sure you can't put cancer in vegetables. She's like, "Oh, those Jews, they can do anything, you know." Um, Obviously, coronavirus was made by the Jews, you know, anything that you can think of, anything in this world that is negative, it's the Jews who did it. There, you know, famously, there's a Muslim man he was actually an American, like he led some American Islamic group, I don't know which one specifically. He made a video about Mossad, which are the Israeli intelligence. He says they're playing with my mind. They came into my house and they stole one of my shoes.
Oh, Jesus.
And it's out there on YouTube. Mossad stole my shoe. So, like, it's really like that. Like, one of my friends said that when he was growing up in Russia, they had a saying that said, if water doesn't come out of the taps, it's because of the Jews. And Arabs are like that too, or Muslims are like that too. Somalis like to consider themselves Arabs, which is where Ilhan Omar is from, and Linda Sarsour is Palestinian. My dad is from Gaza, and the Jew hate there is, you know, of another level, right? They have like puppets on TV teaching little children about slaughtering the Jews, and when I grow up, I want to stab a Jew, and it's just like completely normal. Part of the air that you breathe and the water that you drink. It's not even considered anti-Semitism. It's just considered just life. Like there's nothing negative about it. There's nothing, like they're super unapologetic. It's just blatant. That's just the way it is. It's truth.
And people. Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Bruce.
Go ahead, Vince.
Oh, I was just gonna say it's strange how these people refuse to point the finger to the genesis of the ideas towards religion, right? When someone like Osama bin Laden records a video a month before 9/11 saying that everything he's going to do is explicitly for religious purposes, he's either lying or confused, and they'll completely ignore what's going on in the Middle East on religious grounds and say it has nothing to do with religion, everything to do with U.S. foreign intervention, everything to do with geopolitics. And it's
like Bruce said, it's all about me. It's that narcissism.
Yeah, exactly. And it's the most aggravating thing to see. Because if there's one religion out there that gets the most amount of leeway into the public conversation, it's Islam. And you were going to say, Bruce, before I rudely interrupted you? I'm sorry.
No, not at all. The thing is, I think it, like you said, Yasmin, this seems to come from the protection of a minority comes from a good place. But why, oh why are liberals not throwing their weight behind Muslims like Majid Nawaz and Rahil Raza? And this one incident that just completely blew my mind, and I don't know why people are still defending her, but when Ilhan Omar made some very, very public statements screaming something like, it's all about the Benjamins, baby, or something like that. that's the equivalent of having someone jump onto the public stage and screaming the N-word over and over again, which would torpedo anyone's career, yet she's still here and kicking. And
Yeah.
when what's her name? She runs Muslims for Progressive Values. Annie's
right.
Yeah.
When she asked her about the female genital mutilation.
Yeah, she was representing Muslims in the audience, speaking out against the fundamentalism in her own culture, and Ilhan Omar just used that opportunity to bully her, and everyone's saying, "Hey, look, this is the reality of being a Muslim in this society." No, like you're supporting the wrong Muslim. You're supporting conservative and fundamentalist Islam, and not the liberalistic versions that are more compatible with the kind of humanism we want.
100%. I have no idea, because there are millions of Palestinians who support a two-state solution, who support peace with Israel, but you don't hear from those Palestinians. You only hear from the ones like Linda Sarsour that say we shouldn't even humanize Israelis, right? Same thing with Ilhan Omar. Why are you listening to the anti-Semitic Muslims when you have people like Majid Nawaz, who fights for the independence of Jewish people and for them to have their sovereignty?
Right.
I don't understand why people choose to support those who do not support their values. I don't get it. I don't understand why. Is it because Ilhan Omar is considered more of an authentic Muslim because she's anti-Semitic, as opposed to a Muslim like Majid who isn't, so he's not as authentic? I don't know. I don't know what they're looking for, but it doesn't make any sense to me. And it goes back to something that you actually said earlier before when you were talking about liberals, and you said that they don't stand up for their own values, and you're 100% correct. They do not stand up for their own values. Other groups do, right? I grew up under Sharia. They definitely 100% support their own values. Even when they, like in Sweden, where they have these secularism laws where religious things cannot be worn in the public sphere, like if you're working like as a police officer or something like that, except for hijab. Hijab gets its own, you know what I mean? They will fight. They will fight for their values, even if it means that they are going to fight through your values. But Western people don't stand up for their own values. They don't say, no, sorry, these are our laws. And you don't get to wear a hijab, and you don't get to wear a turban, and you don't get to wear a crucifix, and it's not going to happen. They always give allowances to Muslims.
Well, it's like what Ayaan Hirsi Ali said, how we live in a society where we can afford to spend our own freedom, and when we don't know what it's like not to have any. And
That's
now
a beautiful quote.
Now we're running into a very dangerous time in American politics, because we have the election coming up in a few months, and I'm not optimistic about it. I am sure Donald Trump is going to get reelected, and now I'm not a fan of his, but I am also somewhat glad that Bernie Sanders and the squad.
Definitely.
Like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, no, I don't want you guys there. Sorry.
Oh my God, yes, and also his Iran supporters that are all behind him, and he's not a strong person, right? Like these guys, they would overtake. So I'm so glad that he's not.
Right, he's not Jeremy Corbyn, but he still has some parallels to him. And but my concern now is that Trump has emboldened racists. He's emboldened genuine, honest-to-God racists.
Yeah.
And now we're having so many problems with the dishonesty of the left, the regressive left, not the whole left. Disclaimer to everyone. Everyone out there, we're still on the left, we're still liberals, but we want to disinfect our side completely. But now, in addition to the regressives, we also have the problem of a far-right resurgence, and we could well be heading in that direction. We as a whole want to right the course. We want social justice. We do want social justice for minorities, for Muslims, but we also want to honestly critique minority cultures
Yeah.
To bring about a universal human rights that applies to everybody, not just minorities, but minorities inside minorities. But in the face of a resurgent right wing and a dishonest left wing, there has been some progress, I will admit, in the recent years for a kind of nuanced position to be accepted. But is it strong enough to offer a compelling counter narrative to the nonsense we see on both sides?
Well, time will tell. I think that what we're going through right now is a result of social media and us being able to all communicate. So, we were all, the people that were in red states all had their own narratives that they were just perpetuating, and there was no counter narrative to really cut into that. Same thing with the blue states, same thing with the Sharia states, right? This was all everybody was kind of like living their life. And now there is this global conversation that's going on. I mean, I see this with my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds. We're reaching women in Saudi Arabia. We're reaching, a gay man in Somalia. These are not people that ever would have been able to have any kind of reach into the Western world before, right? Yes. But now they can watch YouTube videos of Christopher Hitchens and, read books by Richard Dawkins online, and it's opening up all of their minds, and it's giving people so much to think about, so much to talk about, and it's introducing so much nuance into the conversation that wasn't there before. It was really easy for people to say stupid things like, no, women in those countries like to wear hijab. They like niqab. There's no problem with it. I mean, it was in 2010 when Sam Harris did his TED Talk, when he talked about women in Afghanistan being covered in bags, and he talked about how that is an atrocity. Right. Who are we to not speak out against that? Who are we to pretend that we're not human beings and we don't recognize that this is a vicious practice? And he was attacked for that. So, now we can say there's people like me and there's lots of other people online where our voices can come and counter those people that are attacking Sam Harris and say, yeah, we don't like to wear it. We don't want to wear it. You can see videos of women in Iran, swaying their hijabs in the streets, and you see videos of them getting arrested, and you see videos of the police brutality. You see videos of vigilantes in the street attacking these women and telling them, you whore, you're naked, because they're not covering their hair. So these narratives that we had before that were so easy and clean, good guy, bad guy, Muslims, women like to wear that hijab, whatever it is, because of social media now, we're forced to rethink all of our preconceived ideas. And we have all of these things like ex-Muslims that come in the way, and we're like, actually, there is another side to this equation that you haven't thought of, right? Or that you hadn't realized existed even. So as much as it looks like, and I agree with you, Trump has empowered the right, the far right, to speak up much more, and the far left feel like the far left to the point where people are like blatantly on television saying I'm communist, or putting the like they're proud of the to me that's just shocking. To me, hearing somebody profess that they're communist and to be proud of it, and to be something that is just so in common vernacular like that, people, it's shocking for me to see that, because that's it's like, do you guys know any history at all? Like, not even history. Like, look at what's happening today. But you get the same responses, right? It just hasn't. It's just like the people who believe in the caliphate. They say, oh, it just hasn't happened perfectly yet, but one day it will. A few more million people have to die before that happens. But whatever. My point being that there are a lot of conversations going on right now. Some voices are louder than others. The louder ones are always the extremes. And even though I truly, honestly believe that rational voices in the middle are by far the majority, and this can be explained, like now when we look at the pandemic, 81% of Americans support social distancing. But what are you hearing when you're scrolling through Twitter all the time, right? You're hearing all of these psycho, conspiracy theory people's voices talking about, America's economy is going to fail. You got Trump with his liberate Virginia, liberate whatever, just like hyperbole. And again, we forget that 81% of the population support social distancing, but we're just listening to the crazies on the fringe.
Right.
And that's unfortunately, if it bleeds, it leads. That just has a lot to do with what we consume in media. We like the things that are loud and controversial, and those are the things that get attention. But I really do believe that we have to just start to ignore the stupid. When where I'm from here in Vancouver is where Jessica Yaniv, who is the trans woman, who was trying to get women, she took them to Human Rights Tribunal and everything because they wouldn't wax her genitals. And it's because she has male genitals, and these are estheticians that are either for religious reasons or don't want to be touching male genitals, or they just weren't trained for it. But Jessica Yaniv got so much traction. I mean, Ricky Gervais was tweeting about her. It was just this big thing. And I just feel like people like that just need to be ignored. And then they'll stop doing stupid shit. But as long as we keep on feeding the crazies, they're just going to keep on doing things like that to get attention. There was a black pumpkin in, I think it was HomeSense or Bed Bath & Beyond, whatever, I don't know, one of those stores. And they said that they're going to take it off the shelves because it's blackface. It's a blackface jack-o'-lantern. And I'm like, why are you doing, just because some idiot wrote in the comment section, this is blackface. All of a sudden, Bed Bath & Beyond were like, oh my God, we're so sorry. We're taking it off the shelves. We apologize. We did not mean to offend anybody. It's like, no. You know what you do when you see a stupid comment like that? You keep scrolling. That's what you do. Because this is just one crazy individual, and we have to stop giving them attention.
Right.
It's an important lesson that everyone has to learn, is that Twitter is not real life. There's countless studies out there that demonstrate that Twitter is by far completely just away from what the public opinion is. And so people need to learn that. And it's funny, you said something originally about how people are completely uncritical of different cultures and all that stuff. And I think that's one of the pestilential and nefarious things about how people are fetishizing diversity at this point, where they're completely saying anything that is, it doesn't matter how different it is. If it's different, it's good, and if it's good, it has to be within our society. But the problem is that, as you said beautifully, there's some lines in the sand that we need to draw. There are some things that we need to say, look, this is not okay. It doesn't matter if this is different from us and we're trying to value diversity. The fact of the matter is there are things out there that are genuinely causing harm, that are causing psychological damage to its adherents, and we need to be vocal about them. And the voices that are saying, no, we need to, we need to accept this, we need to accept diversity. It doesn't matter if it's so different from us. It doesn't matter if it's harming them. We need to accept it. The problem is that even though these people are in the minority, as you said, they have so much institutional power, so many companies backing them up, that it's making the fight almost impossible. And I think we can sort of drive this. Let's talk about a bit about the grander narrative of religion that is sort of encompassing all of this. Much of what happened to you can be directly linked back to religion. Some people would argue that it's not so much religion as it is social norms, but I think religion by definition encompasses social norms in its utility belt, and social norms come from religion. So I'm someone, as I mentioned previously in the podcast, I have very few good things to say about religion, so I won't talk extensively about this. But do you think that the best way to minimize the amount of social damage that is being done is to minimize the amount of religion in society?
So instead of minimizing the religion in society, I would say maximizing critical thinking in societies.
Okay.
And then the second part, then religion will naturally be minimized. But we need to stop allowing religions, obviously, in government. Completely believe in secularism, and I think that there should be no theocracies. There should not be any Sharia. There should not be any religion in laws ever. But then also, like the UN Declaration of Human Rights, for example, when they came up with that, a bunch of Muslim countries, I think like 60 Muslim countries, came forward and they said, we can't sign that because of our religion. So we can't agree that women are equal to men. Sorry, we can't agree that gay people are equal to everybody else. Sorry, we're not going to, we're going to create our own. And then they created their own, and it's called the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights or whatever. That should never have been a thing. That should never have been allowed. That should have been from right then and there. It should have been like, no, it's a universal. Universal includes you. Like, if you want to be part of this, what we're doing here, then you need to sign up. These are the ground rules. It's like when it's like your first day of class, when you sit together with your prof and you talk about, okay, what do we want to learn in this class? What are the ground rules? What are the expectations? It's like that kind of thing. Like, this is what the UN is. This is what we believe in. It should never, these allowances that religious people are given all the time is something that I am so adamantly against. In the United Kingdom, there are over 60 courts that practice Sharia law that Muslim people can go to and get Sharia law. What's the word I'm looking for? Oh, yes. Yes. This is something that Miriam Namazi and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain are working against all the time, and their hashtag is One Law for All. Yeah. So if you want to have like a Sharia divorce or a Sharia, there are certain things under Sharia that are incredibly, just vicious to women. And so if you're going to follow the UK laws, you're not going to be able to be a misogynist in the same way that you would be able to be if you follow Sharia laws. So again, that should not be allowed. If they came forward and they said, we want to have our own courts where we have our own, Islamic laws, the answer is no, sorry, that's not the way it works. This is the United Kingdom. These are our laws for everybody. So I think that that's my biggest issue there, is that we need so critical thinking, education, and then also stop giving religions a pass. And I don't know if you guys have watched the Scientology, it's a mini-series with Leah Remini. So similar, ex-Scientologists, their experiences, it's a cult, right? Same similar cult mentality. So many things are the same. And the reason why they can get away with all of the atrocities that they're getting away with is because of religious freedom. So we need to clarify what we mean by religious freedom. Like, yes, you're allowed to practice your religion, but no, you are not allowed to abuse people and put them into dark rooms and not feed them and all of the stupid things that Scientologists are doing to punish each other.
Yeah. Go ahead. I was just going to say the literature on Scientology is absolutely baffling when you read it and see just how batshit insane that cult really is.
Yeah, and you don't really, their mistake is they don't tell people until they're in it, whereas in Islam you hear all that batshit crazy stuff when you're a child, which is easy because kids will believe anything, right? And then by the time they're adults, they're never going to question it because they've already been thinking it their whole lives.
Yasmine, there's something I wanted to ask about the subject of religion. I grew up Lutheran, and now I wasn't as heavily inveterated in it as some of the people, but it definitely left a scar on my own life. It affected how I thought about hell, about now about gay people, and I broke away from it in my early 20s because I was exposed to other beliefs, other practices, and the straw that eventually broke the camel's back was when one of my best friends, someone who's a brother to me, someone who I loved, told me he was gay, and it now came down to a choice between, do I choose my brother or do I choose this religion? The choice, I'm very pleased to say, was a very easy one. Now, a few years back, before I discovered the works of Sam Harris, and even before I became aware of the problems in Islam today, I needed a community for myself, and I found a incredibly liberal Christian church that I started attending. I let people there know that I'm an atheist. I use the word agnostic because it's an easier term to swallow, and people there are just absolutely lovely. But when I walk around them, or when I talk to them, I definitely have some strong disagreements, but for the most part, if you walk around that church, you won't be able to tell the difference between a secular humanist and the people there. They have people intermarrying with different faiths. They have people praising science. There are people there who are very familiar with Enlightenment values and several of the big name authors that we're all familiar with today. That kind of communal activity still seems to have a lot of value in our society. I've come more to agree with our friend Armin Nabati's favorite subject of Islamic reform not being a tenable idea because it's intellectually dishonest. And Armin, I completely agree with you if you're listening to this.
I love how you look up like he's Jesus or something.
You're Armin. Being around that environment that I'm in, it kind of gives me a feeling that it can be reformed to a degree. You still can celebrate the religion culturally. Richard Dawkins referred to himself as a cultural Christian. I'm curious as to if you've had a lot of contact with someone like Raheel, and has your experience been similar in that regard to mine?
Absolutely. Yeah. So Raheel, Asra, Majid, I know all of them as friends and on a professional level, but I also have Muslim friends that are not public, that are not somebody that you'd recognize their names, but they're about as Muslim as I am, right? They're not practicing anything that you or I would disagree with. They're not believing in any of the anti-Semitic scriptures or any of the homophobic things or any of the racist things or any of the violent things. But for whatever reason, and I think it really does have a lot to do with family and community in the people that I'm thinking of, that's really what it comes down to, is just being part of, it's hard to it's hard to break away from your family and from your community. And if they are giving you the opportunity to be one of them without an ultimatum, then I can understand why they would still choose to be part of the group. So for me, there was no choice, right? My family are very strict Muslims. So if you have to follow Islam perfectly, and if you deviate, then you're a non-believer and you should be killed anyway. The smallest deviation. My mom, she tried to kill me for taking off my hijab. I hadn't even left Islam yet. I was still considering myself a Muslim. And my relationship with her was completely severed. So this is why when I met Raheel Raza, the first time I met her and we talked and I burst into tears and I said, if I'd had someone like you in my family, I would probably still be calling myself Muslim. Because I would be a Muslim like Majid and like all of my friends that I'm thinking of, which is somebody who gets to have my family, gets to have my community, but doesn't have to practice or believe in or do any of the things that I don't want to do. Now, those people from the Muslim community are still accepted because they're considered misguided Muslims. But if you are somebody who stands up firm and says, no, I disagree with all of that stuff, I don't believe in any of it, and in fact, you are dangerous and wrong and you're hurting people, then you are somebody who should be killed. According to Islam, you're given 3 days to repent, and if you don't, then you should be killed. Now, I say that, but I don't know if that would be the truth, because I have very low tolerance for having any kind of conflicting, like if I notice within myself that I have any kind of cognitive dissonance, I need to remove it. I'm like, wait, no, I have to figure this out. Yeah. So I probably, they're in my family, there's one ex-Muslim cousin who speaks to me, and she is actually, what are they called? Reverend, pastor, I don't know, but she's in a Unitarian church. So she's just, she's agnostic like you or I, but she's a leader in the Unitarian church, which is basically free for all. Right. I don't know what they really. So there's her, and then there is my uncle. I have one uncle that speaks to me. And he speaks to me, and he will still call me, when he refers to me, he'll say, you're a misguided Muslim. You're not a good Muslim. And I'm like, I'm not a Muslim at all. But to him, to say I'm not a Muslim is insulting. So he won't say that, But yeah, I definitely do believe that there is space for people like my uncle, for people like my cousin, who want to have a tenuous relationship with religion and who still want to be part of their family. And I also think that somebody like me who doesn't want anything to do with religion should also still be allowed to be part of their family, but that's not up to me. So that's up to every individual family. But if my daughters grew up and said, actually I want to practice X religion, I am going to support them whatever they do. I'll talk to them about it and I'll give them my opinion, and but I'm not going to ever disown them because of a choice that they've made, right? One of my friends, Rivka, was telling me about how she was like, oh, her palms are all sweaty, and then she finally tells her grandma, like, I don't believe, and her grandma says, who believes? And it was just like the best, like, Jewish people are totally civilized with this. Why can't the rest of us be civilized like them? They don't care, right? Believe, don't believe, you're still family, right? We're still the same tribe. They don't even care if what your beliefs are and to what level you're Orthodox or Reform or whatever kind of Jew you are. You're still one of us. And I think that, I don't know if Muslims can ever get there, because Muslims are so incredibly, they come from like hundreds of different countries. They're not one tribe like Jews are. But it can be more similar to the way Christians are, which they are also from hundreds of different countries, and they have all these, beliefs and stuff, but they are accepting of each other, I live by a church that has a big rainbow flag on it. I wouldn't have seen a rainbow flag on a church when I was growing up, but I do these days. And I think that that is beautiful. I have seen so much progress in like 30, 40 years. Why can't we see the same kind of progress happening in Islam as well? And I think we absolutely can. Having lived in Muslim-majority countries, I can tell you, people don't like Sharia. They're human beings. Why would they? Nobody likes it. It's a shitty system to live under. Nobody's happy. The only ones that are happy are the people that are controlling the government and controlling the laws. Those are the only ones that are supportive of it.
I mean, we've had like a bisexual pastor, this lovely lady who I absolutely adore, who's the values are so liberal that I kind of home there, and I'm glad they've accepted me, and it really is a beautiful thing. But just a short aside, you mentioned Rivka Goldstein, or I don't know his name. Yeah. The funny thing is, I was just mentioning this to Vince last night. I met her once. I went to the Freedom from Religion Foundation event a year and a half ago, where I met Sarah Hyder and Mohammed Syed, and Muhammad al-Qadr was giving a speech there, and in my Instagram photos, I was flipping through it, and there's a photograph of myself and Muhammad al-Qadr, and there in the photograph, who I did not know who it was at the time, was Rivka. I'm like, oh my god,
she's everywhere.
Yeah. Vince, do you have another question you want to bring up, or?
I think that's a good place to end the podcast. We're in at an hour and 15 minutes, unless you have something you'd like to say.
I have two more that one of them, I really do need to ask. Yasmine, if I can ask you a personal question. We hear a lot of talk about from people who, people like yourself who feel betrayed by liberals, pseudo-liberals who just will not stand up for these values that we all hold dear. But something that's really been bothering me, and I mentioned earlier in this podcast that I'm going into this under a pseudonym because of my profession, and there's a quote-unquote diversity department that I'm pretty sure is anything but. But I still want to act against this regressivism we see in our ranks. But it still feels to me that not truly coming out is still in some ways a betrayal of people like yourself, who I admire greatly. You're one of my heroes, and people like Ali, like Armin, like Sam, and all others. And that really bothers me, and I'm sure that it rubs on the conscience of people out there who want to speak out against this but are just afraid to. I'm still doing what I can, but I know I need to step out eventually. But can I have your thoughts and feelings on this?
My thoughts and feelings on that are that every individual has to do what makes most sense in that individual's life. So when I first came out, I was completely anonymous. I was called Confessions of an Ex-Muslim, and I didn't have a face, and I didn't have a name even. And the only reason why I started to come out with my face and name and everything was because I had so many people contacting me from police states all over the world in these really closed societies that were truly unable to speak out. And so they were asking me to be their voice. And so at that point, I felt a sense of shame and also a sense of responsibility that I should be, if I am living in a secular country and I have, of course it's a risk for everybody, but it's a much greater risk for somebody living in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Afghanistan than it is for me, obviously, right? So if they aren't going to speak out because the government could arrest them or people could, just vigilante justice, they could end up getting killed. If they can't speak out and then I refuse to speak out because I'm scared for myself and my family, who's going to talk about this, right? It's kind of like I remember when Ayaan Hirsi Ali said, I don't want to do this, I'm compelled to do this. You feel like you have no other choice. Yeah. Like I would love to not be doing this. I would love for this to not be an issue. I said so many times, I will talk until I feel that my voice doesn't need to be heard anymore because people get it. It's now part of the public conversation. So I was really compelled to do that and pushed out of my comfort zone. But it was a decision that I made. But I didn't make it until I felt comfortable doing it. And because I felt like the gains, like the positives, would outweigh the risks. You have to feel comfortable in your own situation too. You have to feel the same way. Like, what is the point of you taking these risks? What could you gain from it, or what will be gained from it? So for me, I had a specific answer to that question. And if you don't have a specific answer to that question, then there's really no point in putting yourself at risk unless, you're ready to do that, or you feel like you really want to do that, or you feel like there's a huge benefit to you doing that.
having grown up in the Bay Area, and that's an exceptionally liberal area, and seeing my friends and family being infected with this bullshit, I want it out of my home. And I'm preparing myself to speak rather vociferously against it.
Yeah, it's pretty scary that you guys are going to have Trump again, because it means that there's going to be more digging your heels, more people just, it's not going to end anytime soon, right? The polarization is only going to get worse. And, I don't know what you're doing. Like, you are doing something, right? It's not like you're just ignoring the conversation and going about your life. You are helping to fight this battle of ideas. You've got this podcast. You've got your Twitter account. Like, you're out there. And I think that's really all we can do, is we got to just keep on countering the bad ideas with good ideas, and just refuse to be silenced, but also taking very calculated measures about when we, when you go public, or if you go public at all.
I'll have to do it eventually. I'll let you know why in a private message later on. But we don't want to end the podcast on a depressive note. But
it's not depressing. I think that what you're doing is great. I think what both of you are doing is great. I think I feel so incredibly motivated and heartened and inspired by seeing so many people feel empowered to speak up about these topics. Because just 3 years ago, nobody was saying anything publicly. I would get private messages, but people were too scared to say anything publicly. People are feeling now like, this has nothing to do with bigotry. This has nothing to do with Islamophobia. This has nothing to do with hate. This has everything to do with Enlightenment values and standing up for human beings and standing up against religious atrocities. And, we have found each other online too, just like everybody, all over the Middle East and North Africa found us. We found each other, and we're able to empower each other and say, we're in this together. And, I have seen such huge changes. I'm just going to tell you this really quick story, because it's everything in a nutshell. The very first time I did Free from Hijab, I did No Hijab Day. A woman who was a Muslim in an abusive relationship with an autistic son, her and I had been speaking privately for about a year. She's from Lebanon. And when I said I was going to have this No Hijab Day, she privately messaged me and she said, you know what? I think I'm going to remove my hijab on that day, and I'm going to post a video of it. And I was like, I am 100% supportive of you doing whatever you want to do. I'm right behind you. She posted the video, and it got like 10,000 likes or something. People don't understand how powerful it is to just click a like. This changed this woman's life. Today, she has taken off her hijab, left her abusive husband, left Islam entirely, and is living as a single mom supporting her son. Like, it is, and she's got her own apartment, and she's going to school, and she's, her life has completely changed,
like
just because of the internet and being able to have all these people support her, and like complete strangers motivating her to propel her life into a positive direction. And so that's what you are doing, and that's the kind of thing that inspires me to keep going too.
Wow.
Well, Vince, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's like you guys are Canadian. You go. That's what we do.
Americans.
Well, there's people like yourself, Sam, and Ali Armin, all these fantastic people that we've met, and Faisal with this incredible sense of humor, who's been the torch that's lit the candles that we are, and we're on the front lines. We're trying to back you guys up as much as we can, because liberal values, they're the way forward. Now, I hear on Twitter that you have a new book coming out. Do you want to speak a little bit about what it involves?
Sure, yeah. So with this book that I just released, Unveiled, How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam, of course, the number one feedback that I get from people is, but how common was your experience, you know? But it's not just your story. Like how often are women forced into marriages? And I really just feel like, you know, part of me just wants to be like, I don't know what fucking rock you've been dead under, but how are you not aware that there are Muslim women being pressured into marriages from like the age of 10 and from the age of 8, actually, all over the world, all the time? Like, how is this new news to you? But instead, I'm going to be productive about my response. And what I'm doing is I'm collecting stories from people. I mean, one of the stories is a woman who is living in Malaysia who went to school at Al-Azhar University in Egypt. Al-Azhar, which is like, you know, the top university of Islamic studies. And she's an ex-Muslim now. And, you know, so many different stories of different people from all around the world. I'm trying to get, like, pick as many, like, a variation, an eclectic mix of people of different backgrounds, from different, like, cultural backgrounds, and also living in different parts of the world, to show that the one thread that connects all of these people that should have nothing in common is Islam. And that goes back to your initial point there, Vincent, when you were talking about, is it religion or is it just the society, and how the two inform each other? Well, this will really answer that question, because we are coming from completely different societies. We don't share the same language, the same food, the same culture, the same traditions, nothing. But our lives are almost in lockstep with each other. Now, how did that happen?
I can't wait to read that book, because it's stories like that that really just propel me to keep doing what I'm doing. Because, as Bruce said, I'm becoming increasingly concerned about sort of being in the public light, because, you know, I'm studying physics and I hope to get into a PhD program eventually. And I recently had a friend, his name's Colin Wright, he's on Twitter, who he can't get a job, or he can't get, you know, any good jobs at all, because his views are public. And that's what's getting me scared, where originally where it would have been unethical to ask personal questions about your own personal viewpoints on particular topics at a job interview, well, you don't even have to ask those questions anymore, because you can just look at that person's social media or their YouTube channels and see what they think on particular topics and hire them on that basis. And Colin Wright is not getting hired on the basis of what his views are on sex and gender and you know, and the far regressive left. And that's why I'm getting increasingly concerned about doing these sorts of videos. But when I hear stories such as yourself, and when I read your book, I'm like, I really need to talk about this, because people need to know these stories. And especially since I'm not white, so I'm not going to get filed with an accusation of, you know, just cultural relativism or...
Oh, you're going to get it. I get white supremacist.
Oh, no kidding? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It's like, I haven't gotten that yet.
Arab white supremacist. Yeah.
Yeah, but I can't imagine how much worse it'd be off for me if I were white. So that's a good thing that
No, you're right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, for sure.
But I want to thank you so much endlessly for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute honor to have you on here. And it's been great to have one of my heroes here speaking with me. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, you guys. My absolute pleasure.
You can go ahead and follow Yasmine at on her Twitter. I'll put it on the screen right here at Yasmine. It's at Yasmine Mohammed, right?
It's Yasmine Mohammed's the name, and then it's at Yas Mohammed.
Gotcha.
That's
Okay.
Yeah.
Feel free to follow me as well at Latent Physicist. I'll be sure to respond to any tweets that you send me my way, and I usually follow back as well. But again, thanks, Yasmine, for coming on the podcast. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Thinking Out Loud. If you liked what you heard, feel free to follow me on Twitter at Latent Physicist. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, The Babylon Project, which is where I post most of my stuff. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you in the next one.